piece that was just published in this journal. This journal is called Ecotone, Reimagining Place, and it's a journal devoted to writing about interesting and exotic places. So,
Dodge City.
that's right. We're interesting and we are exotic. So, anyway, I guess they felt that way. I'm going to read for about, I'll read for about 5 pages. We'll be finished maybe in 20 minutes, and then we'll have some dessert. So, this piece is called Dragging Wyatt Earp. For a teenager suffering the boredom of the cowboy capital circa 1980, the only thing to do at night, so we all said, was to drag Wyatt Earp. By this we did not mean, as the image would suggest, that we would pull the 19th century lawman through the street by his boot heels, but only that we'd cruise up and down Wyatt Earp Boulevard in our beat-up Chevrolets and hand-me-down Buicks, searching for that elusive bit of excitement that always seemed to be had to pay for in any meaningful way. Dragging Wyatt Earp was a ritual and a clearly demarcated rite of passage, one that began at 14 or 15, the years when most of us were getting our driver's licenses, and that ended 2 or 3 years later when the pool halls and beer joints and lakeside keg parties began to absorb us. Had we been city kids, we'd have been hanging out at the mall or the Cineplex. But we weren't city kids. And Dodge was a suburb of nowhere. Hundreds of mostly tedious miles from Dallas, Denver, or Kansas City, and there was much that we would never do or see before the age of 19 and 20. But we could drink and drive. Both at early ages and in plain sight of the police. A kind of unwritten law had been established long ago. I can recall at 16 or 17 wheeling into the quick shop at 12th and Wyatt Earp and emerging 5 minutes later with a 6-pack of Coors cradled under my arm like a football. Often the person selling me the beer knew exactly who I was, who my father was, who my brothers were, what position I played on the high school basketball team. Sometimes there would even be a cop car in the parking lot. When I came out, 2 sheriff's deputies sitting side by side with their elbows jutting out of open windows. I would nod to them as I ambled past with my and they'd nod right back in that slow, calculated manner. Police everywhere. You be careful now, you hear? Yes, sir, I'd say, innocent as you please. Once on Wyatt Earp, the routine rarely varied. The official speed limit was 35 miles an hour. But as with the drinking age, we regarded this as more of a suggestion than an actual law. Either you went 15 miles an hour or you went 50, depending on your style, purpose, the amount of gas in your tank, or the amount of beer or Jack Daniels or peppermint schnapps you'd consume. Racing from one light to the next was not unheard of, but neither was it a regular occurrence, and for the same reason that fights rarely broke out. A pecking order had been established long before, in 7th or 8th grade, so what was the point? Dragging Wyatt Earp was about killing time. It was about hanging out and hooking up, growing up, and throwing up. Indeed, in the teen vernacular of Dodge City circa 1980, to Earp was to vomit. Usually by hanging one's head out the door of a moving car. It was about chasing dreams and bursting at the seams and endlessly rehearsing for that preordained day when we too would get the hell out of Dodge.
Yeah.
Never to return. Dodge City in 1876 was a quintessential Western boomtown, a nexus for cash and cattle where overlords like the legendary Shanghai Pierce sold their massive herds at a profit and immediately paid off their young, hired underlings, most of them Texans away from home for the first time. To say that the merchants of Dodge City saw these greenhorns coming would be an understatement of epic proportions. The town got its start, after all, as a group of tents straddling a muddy lane 5 miles from the army outpost to whose soldiers it sold whiskey, women, the small hope of a world away from Indian fighting and the rolling monotony of the high plains. Like the soldiers and the buffalo hunters who came before them, the pimpled adolescent cowboys who came north with the herds were bored, thirsty, and easily separated from their money, a fact not lost on the town's gamblers, prostitutes, and whiskey dealers. If there was a problem with all of this, a glitch, so to speak, in an otherwise flawless business plan, it was the town's tendency to erupt in periodic bouts of profit-draining violence. Ordinances against public intoxication and the carrying of firearms in the city limits were duly promulgated and composed, but enforcing them was another matter. That required the touch of a man like Wyatt Earp, who had honed his skills as a peace officer in the cow towns of Ellsworth and Wichita, and was more than ready to try them out in Dodge City too, provided, of course, the price was right. The epicenter of my teen years was the parking lot below Boot Hill Museum. A rectangle of concrete the size of a football field that on any given night contained the same tribes and anthropologically interesting subgroups as the high school. Jocks, cheerleaders, potheads, future farmers of America. The only difference being that here one leaned against the polished hood of one's car instead of against one's locker. The same atmosphere of boredom, of stoically doing one's time, obtained in both places. If you had asked our parents why they allowed us to openly drink alcohol in a parking lot in the middle of town, they probably would have said, at least we know where they are. At least they're safe. And yet what irony in this place, where we gathered most nights to gossip, pose, and drink beer, bore a name synonymous the world over with sin and violent death. The phrases deadline, red light district, and die with your boots on all originated here, as did the legends of Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson, Doc Holliday and Big Nose Kate Elder, Mysterious Dave Mather, and Squirrel Tooth Alice. Did we know? Did we care? But what is the use of asking? We were teenagers, after all. It would have taken a lot more than something history to impress us. In the middle of the parking lot was a large cage, perhaps 10 feet square, made of 2x4s and chicken wire. Sometime before, so the story went, the parking lot had become so littered with crushed beer cans that someone's dad or Eagle Scout older brother had become inspired to build the cage to hold the empties. I couldn't say now if the story is true, but we certainly were proud of it at the time, and most weekends we possessed no higher ambition than to fill the cage. This was the kind of thing that mattered to us, not Wyatt Earp, not history. Boot Hill parking lot was the place I took my first real girlfriend on our first real date. She was a cheerleader, and I was a jock suffering from the usual jock grandiosity. I can still recall what it felt like to make that slow, head-turning crawl through the parking lot. With all the cars parked at Boot Hill, you weren't an official couple until you had run that gun.